Welcome to Everyday Linux User. In today's video, I am going to be comparing Linux Mint with Ubuntu Cinnamon. So I've got the latest Linux Mint, 21.2. I've got the latest Ubuntu Cinnamon, which is the 2304, and I am going to be comparing them. Now, the interesting thing is Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, and Linux Mint are also responsible for developing Cinnamon. So on one hand, Ubuntu is going to be ahead of Linux Mint because Linux Mint is based off of Ubuntu, so it's likely that Ubuntu is always going to be a small step ahead. But at the same time, Linux Mint are developing Cinnamon, so Ubuntu's Cinnamon desktop is likely to be behind Linux Mint's Cinnamon desktop. So you've got this sort of like cyclical effect where um, one's dependent on the other and the other one's dependent on the other. So yeah, it's interesting. There's a few things we can do to compare them. Well, usability seems a bit of a problem because they both use the same desktop. So in theory, Mint and Ubuntu will be the same in terms of usability. So we've got boot time, and I can tell you now that Linux Mint consistently boots about 4 seconds faster than Ubuntu. I haven't recorded that because it means doing it on my phone. And do you really need to prove that that's the case? It's 4 seconds. It's not that big a deal, and that's up to the point of the login screen appearing. So um, Mint's about 20 seconds to the boot screen, and Ubuntu's about 24 seconds to the login screen. And then I timed the amount of time it takes after typing in your password to get to the main Cinnamon desktop. And for Linux Mint, it was about 7 seconds, and Ubuntu was about 7 seconds as well. I did 3 rounds of testing on each in case one of them had some setup to do on the very first run, but consistently around those timings. So with Linux Mint, let's look at the Neo Fetch. And what we can see here is we've got Cinnamon 5.8.4, and I think the same Neo Fetch for Ubuntu is 5.6.7. So Cinnamon on Mint is significantly ahead, but the kernel for Linux Mint is 5.15.0 dash 76, where for Ubuntu is 6.2 .0 dash 27. So Ubuntu is significantly ahead of Mint in that score. Now, looking at this memory, it's a bit of a red herring. It says 1.2 gigabytes. You have to remember when recording video, but idling, this was at 842 megabytes for Cinnamon on Linux Mint. And I've done the same test on Ubuntu, and I will show you the Ubuntu test shortly. It was 1.2 gigabytes. So Linux Mint slightly lighter than Ubuntu. But all these things are kind of negligible at this moment in time. So the next thing we can look at is what's installed. So for Linux Mint, we have pics for organising your photos, and that's LibreOffice. We've got a drawing utility. Chrome didn't come installed. I installed that myself. You've got a Firefox web browser, you've got an IRC chat, Thunderbird mail, BitTorrent client, and you've got this web apps thing, which allows you to run web applications as if they're a desktop application. So to prove that point, I'm going to close this welcome screen. Actually, I'm just going to minimize it because it's something we'll look at. And you can click add here. So we could just say YouTube, and we'll say YouTube, and we'll make it Everyday Linux User. And the browser you want to use, I'm going to use Chrome, and That's all I'm going to do there. And so I can click that. And now, if I go here into my web app, you can see I've got YouTube here. And I can click on that and it will open up in Chrome. And those of you who are eagle-eyed will see that I forgot to put .com at the end of that. So if I click that again, you can also launch it from here. And there you have it. You can have a desktop app version of my YouTube channel. So that's a nice feature of Linux Mint that doesn't come with Ubuntu Cinnamon. You've got the LibreOffice suite and PokerStars I installed, and then you got Celluloid, which is for watching videos. Cheese I installed. Hypnotics is a TV app, and then you've got Rhythmbox, which is an audio player. And then you've got some admin tools as well. Obviously, hardware is going to be the same between Linux Mint and Ubuntu. So I'm using a wired connection, but I can click here and I've got wireless available. If I go to printers, you can see my printer automatically set up. And I dare say if I go to Bluetooth, and I click search, I can find various devices to connect to. And there's my phone. So I don't think there's anything different hardware-wise. The only thing you might get, because Ubuntu is on a slightly later version of the kernel, if you've got more modern hardware that's been released more recently, then it's more likely to work on Ubuntu than it is Linux Mint. But we're talking really new hardware, and so that's negligible, I'd have thought. The other main issue that we can compare, the other main thing that we can compare is software management. So the other thing we can compare is package management. So Linux Mint has got this software manager here, and it uses flatpaks. So and it's turned on by default. So I've already got Chrome installed. So let's find something like Visual Studio. And there's three versions there. You can see. So if we choose the actual Microsoft one, it's a flat hub, and it is 955 meg to download and takes 2.9 gigabytes of disk space. So now it's installed. Let's see how long it takes to launch the application. I'm going to do it from the menu as opposed from there, just to make sure it is a fair test. So there it is under programming, and I'm going to click the button now, and I've got stopwatch running. And the point of this is I'm going to test it against the snap of Ubuntu. So that's about 15 seconds. 15 to 16 seconds, because it did take a couple of seconds to get beyond that screen. So there's not really much else to compare. So if you're really scratching at the surface, you could look at the backgrounds. They're nice backgrounds, but it's not so special that you'd worry about it if it wasn't there. I mean, these are quite nice. Yeah. But I'm not going to choose my distribution based on a picture of whether it's got a picture of New Zealand or not. So that's Linux Mint. Let's switch over to Ubuntu Cinnamon and see what we get there. So here we are in Ubuntu, and as mentioned previously, it boots about 4 seconds slower than Mint, so it's negligible. The internet works perfectly fine. The printer found just it was for Cinnamon, and we've got Bluetooth Manager. and it's exactly the same as it was before. I haven't put my phone on this time, but it works. So hardware-wise, you're not going to get any difference between Ubuntu Cinnamon and Linux Mint Cinnamon, other than the fact that Ubuntu uses a slightly newer version of the kernel. So here's the Neo fetch for Ubuntu Cinnamon. And you can see it's 2304 and the kernel is 6.2.0-27 and the Cinnamon is 5.6.7. So it's behind Mint when it comes to the Cinnamon desktop. When it comes to applications, we've got a few games. We didn't have any games for Linux Mint. Under graphics, you've got a few more things installed. You've got GIMP, Image Magic, and you've got GNOME Photos, and then you've got the GThumb for image viewing as well. Under the internet, I haven't installed Chrome on here yet, so we've got Firefox and we've got Thunderbird Mail, so there's no IRC client, and there's no BitTorrent. Under Office, LibreOffice is installed. Under Sound, got Rhythmbox and Celluloid. I've obviously installed that. And under Administration, you've got the extra Synaptic Package Manager, but you've also got GNOME Software Manager as well. And that's pretty much it. So if I go back to the Neo fetch again, you'll see the memory is about 1.4 gigabytes. So again, compared with Mint, it's kind of negligible, the difference in memory usage. Let's look at software management. All the things that you'd expect to be there are there. So Chrome isn't showing up as an option. Now I've seen this before with Ubuntu. So let's have a look for Visual Studio. And it's a snap package, so we'll install that. So that's it installed now. So we'll do the same test again. We'll go to Programming and Visual Studio Code, and we'll put the stopwatch on and see the ultimate question: are snaps slower than Flatpaks? Ready, steady, go. And the answer is yes. So that was about 20 seconds. Feel free to time it. You can use the video. It depends where you stop at. Definitely a negligible difference, not enough to write home about. So the perceptions of snaps being so much slower might be a bit of a myth. And it feels quite responsive. We can look at the artwork again. This backgrounds tool is definitely not performing as well as the Mint one. Now it's moving. But it took a bit of time to come up to speed. And there's your Cinnamon wallpapers. So I'd say the Mint wallpaper is probably a little bit better than the Ubuntu ones. Now, if you really want to make Ubuntu work the same way as Mint in terms of package management, what you can do is if we go to Firefox and we type in Flatpaks Ubuntu, you've got this Ubuntu quick setup guide here. And all you've got to do is open up a terminal window and copy these commands in. So the first command got Flatpak. The second command installed the GNOME software plugin. And the third command adds the FlatHub repository. Now what we have to do is reboot the computer, and FlatHubs should be a part of Ubuntu Cinnamon. So rebooted, let's go to the software manager. And you can see it's downloaded the software catalog because it's now putting in the Flatpaks. And now we'll search for Chrome. Oops. And you can see we've now got Chrome available. And that's coming from FlatHub. So you can see I've got that one installed. If I go for this one, it's going to be the FlatHub. So both of those are now installed. But if I go to the internet, the Chrome option hasn't appeared. If I go to programming, it's still only the snap that's showing up here. And that's the same if I scroll all the way down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reboot, see if they appear as options. So I've rebooted, and under my internet I can now see Chrome. And there's my site again. And now we've got two Visual Studio codes. So what we're going to do is we're going to time them. And we're going to time them to exactly the same point again. So, same distribution, Flatpak versus Snap. So we're going to do Snap first. That's about 10 seconds it took to get to this point here. So if we do the same for the Flatpak, and in this case the FlatHub was slower than the Snap. So that's about 20 seconds. 20 seconds, maybe a little bit more to get to this point. I think we'll do it again just to prove the point. Snap. About 9-10 seconds. I notice it doesn't pull up the rest of the things here. And then we'll go for FlatHub. Wow, that was about 9 seconds as well. So on pure Ubuntu, the Snap versus Flatpak debate is firmly in. It's totally up for debate because running the Flatpak and running the Snap, sometimes the Snap's faster and sometimes the Flatpak's faster. On Linux Mint, the Flatpak is definitely faster than the Snap package of Ubuntu. And I think I'm ready now to draw my conclusions. And my conclusion is this. They're both virtually the same distribution. There's not enough difference between them. They are virtually the same distribution. One's got a slightly newer kernel, one's got a slightly newer desktop environment. That's it really. And then the only real difference is theming and the package management, and a few applications that are installed either way. I don't think you're going to choose which one you want based on which application is already installed. So my experience is that Linux Mint is slicker. Uh, Linux Mint feels more polished. It feels like everything's more responsive. Uh, but when I was running, it was installing Chrome, for instance, just appeared in the software center. Now I know not everyone wants Chrome, but packages, common packages appear straight away in Mint. The Flatpaks are faster in Mint than snaps are in Ubuntu. But snaps and Flatpaks in Ubuntu were negligible difference. Boot times, Ubuntu slightly slower. Uh, Everything's a little bit more clunky with Ubuntu. So if I had to choose still whether I would go for Linux Mint Cinnamon or Ubuntu Cinnamon, I would still choose Linux Mint. But there's not much in it, not much in it at all. So there is the question, do we need both distributions? Is there a space for both distributions if they're so similar? And I think the fact is, I wouldn't want to live in a world without Linux Mint. But that doesn't mean Ubuntu Cinnamon shouldn't exist either. But uh, in my opinion, Linux Mint is the way I would still direct new users to over Ubuntu Cinnamon. I just find it more responsive, and that goes with Ubuntu as well in general. Is that I find Linux Mint more responsive than Ubuntu, and it might be in my head. You've seen the timings here. There's not much in it, but it's just the feel of the systems is Linux Mint is more slick. It's just it feels like it's been done right. It feels like Ubuntu still scratching at the surface of trying to get it right, and that's it really. And that's really the end of the comparison. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on Everyday Linux User.